Hi guys, welcome to the latest Black Yarning episode. Today I've got a wonderful friend popping in, Dorcas. But hi Dorcas, how are you?
Hello, AJ. I'm good. Hi, everyone.
Hi, and it's a little bit take us a little while to connect because you are one of the most busiest people I know. Um,
Oh gosh.
Producer, script writer, co-founder of a number of different organizations, TV host as well. Yeah, wow. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, there's a lot to tell, but for the sake of time and where we are, I'll try to minimize it. But people can probably find out wherever, in many different platforms. But basically, I think I don't know. I don't even know where to start. I mean, you mentioned that I'm a co-founder of a couple of organizations, so maybe I'll just start there. Yeah. So in 2000 and I don't know, 16, 15, somewhere there, I founded Oz African TV, which was or is the first TV show to be hosted and run by Black people, as in of African descent. So yes, I founded that basically because given an opportunity, any Black person would have done it. So I happened to be in a position where I had connections. I'd been working in the film industry for quite a while. I'd been working on Neighbours, and I made some great friends there who, I put the idea to them. I was like, guys, I want to start this. It's important. They were like, yep, we love the idea of diversity. We need more different voices. How can we help? So I started that. And then fast forward, to a couple of years ago, during COVID, I co-founded Yo City with Percy Dube. And it's basically like, I like to say everything that I do, it's an extension of who I am. So it's another, part of me, creative space that champions musicians, artists, we're connected by art, basically. And what we've done so far, we've worked with different city councils, we've put on events that are meaningful. And basically we are trying to, there's a thing where as people of color, as, historically marginalized communities, we tend to sit in a corner and preach to the choir, unwittingly so. Sometimes, the grants that you apply for might say, hey, these are your audiences, but the reality is it doesn't make sense to always sit in a corner and tell the same people that we're trying to make change. So basically with Your City, what we try to do is approach bigger venues, spaces that traditionally or systemically are for white people, spaces like NGV, ACME, all of these big organizations. So we try to partner with them in a way that we can bring different audiences into the space, we can bring artists into the space, but do it safely, culturally safely, and encourage the organization and the artists to connect in that way. So yeah, so that's what I do. And I also work at Multicultural Arts Victoria. I've done a few different things for MAV. I've worked as a producer where, we'll put together events, again, culturally safe, supporting culturally and linguistically diverse artists within MAV. And I also work in brokerage where I'm like the bridge between I represent MAV as the bridge between organizations that want to include culturally diverse artists safely and respectfully. So they'll come to MAV and say, hey, we have an event. Would really love to have, different people from different cultures to kind of come and feel safe in a space, but also just, practice their art and introduce the people to our audiences and our staff. So we do that kind of thing. We facilitate that connection. So I'll stop there for
now. Question: how old were you when you decided you wanted to get into the arts?
It was weird because I went to a township school I was born in South Africa, so I attended school in the township. In the township, there's no arts, we didn't have an art class, we didn't have anything creative. If you did the arts or you loved it, would have been something that you did after school, you know, in a group, like, you know, youth group or something like that. So I didn't get engaged in any of that. I was always a dancer. I started dancing at the age of 14. That was as creative as I got. But when I got to university, I had studied maths and science in high school, which was the normal stuff. You do maths, you do science, you do accounting, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an engineer, you know, the regular stuff. So I went to uni thinking I'm going to be an engineer. So I submitted my application. I was going to become a mechanical engineer. I got accepted. I started and I did semester 1, semester 2, and I was like, oh, this is too painful. Like, I just didn't feel like I fitted in the classes. Like, the people were great, but there was no connection. I was just there, you know what I mean? And then one day I went and I spoke with like a student counselor or something, you know, one of those people who help you find your path. And we had a really good conversation. I did a psychometric test. And at the end of it, she opened the window and showed me a blue building outside. And she was like, I think you should go to that building. You might find something that you like there. I went to that building and it was a fine arts building. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then, you know, long story short, I did a test. I hadn't drawn before. And, you know, one of the lecturers was like, okay, so this is what you're going to do when you get home. You're going to look out the window. I lived in an apartment in Joburg in the city. You look out the apartment, I said, I don't have drawing materials. I was like, okay, here's a piece of paper. Here's some pencil. Take that. Got home, look out the window, draw whatever it is that you see. And I want you to do that every day and then come for the entry test and all of that stuff. So I did that. That was my first experience of the arts, you know, the creative space. And I think through studying fine arts, my mind opened up to many different things, because through that I started doing video art, you know, as it started to become a thing. And then, you know, because you do conceptual art, so, you know, you can start thinking about movement, you can start thinking about how do visual arts and other modes of creative come together. And so, yeah, so that got me interested in the creative space at large. And then from then on, anything that was creative along my path, I embraced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you came to Australia?
I was 26. It was 2016. Yeah, and then when I think you asked me before, how old, did you say how old was I? And then I gave you a whole history.
That's okay, that's okay.
But it kind of gives you an idea, you know what I mean? It's like from high school days and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, so I was 26 when I came to Australia. And funny thing was, when I came, I was trying to, because when I finished studying my fine arts, I got into the television space, because I lived right next door to, like, you know, SABC, South African Broadcasting Corporation, which is the biggest, you know, the main broadcaster in South Africa. And I went there to be an extra because I was doing acting and everything. But then I ended up in the art department because, you know, me, I was so nosy. So I started walking around. And then I spoke to the guys in the art department. I introduced myself, told them who I am, what I do. And they were like, oh, you do art. You should speak to our art director. So I spoke to the art director and she was like, oh, you should come and work with us on set. So I started making props, like, you know, fake products in the supermarket. I started doing paintings in some paintings on set, working with the set dressers and set designers. And so when I finished uni, I went straight into the art department. And so, you know, but then when I came to Australia in 2016, I was trying to get out of TV to go back into the arts, but it's still, yeah, I'm still getting there.
And then when you were in Australia, you did your Masters of Arts in writing, didn't you?
Yeah. So because what I found in Australia when I came here, you know, I was coming straight from TV and working back home. I had an agent. Everything in my life was organized. I was like 6 months ahead. I had a job. You know, I've interviewed. I was working as a freelancer in the art department and costume department as a stylist and, you know, all of that and standby. So, you know, my life was sorted. My taxes were done. So I got here, picked up the phone. I think I called, I don't know, like one of the main agents. And I was like, I'm this person. I've done this. I've done that. And they're like, no, we're not taking anyone on our books. And I was like, how am I going to get a job? They're like, well, don't know. And then that became a conundrum. That's how I ended up on Neighbours, because I was like, oh, okay, cool. The only way I can get a job is through something that's kind of a weekly thing. It's in one spot and all of that. So I didn't have connections. That's one. But then I realized while I was at Neighbours, because I started having kids and all of that, and the hours were crazy. So I thought one of the best things for me to start getting connections and expanding my networks was to study. So I enrolled for Master of Arts in Writing through Swinburne University. And then because I loved writing, it became an outlet. And so, and I thought if I leave the industry face fronting, I'll probably come in the back door. So I did writing, and I majored in script writing and other stuff. One thing that I couldn't do was journalism. It's too much, but yeah, that's why I did Master of Arts in writing.
Yeah. So what do you prefer, acting, producing, or writing?
I think they relate to one another. Like right now, I'd say it depends on the project. Like I've been doing a few commercials. I've got like an agent, but I'm not like super active on it because time doesn't quite permit. I'm a mom, I work, I do this, I do that. So when I can, I love to be on camera. And that's why with Oz African TV, I was producing it, and I had an idea in my mind. Of course, I bring people on board and I work with them, and I presented it, because I think if you were asking me between acting and presenting, I'd rather be a presenter. And so in terms of writing, I like to write creative nonfiction. So that's why a lifestyle show made sense. Like when I started doing writing, I was more interested in documentary kind of, style of writing or storytelling. So I think in terms of working in the film industry, writing, producing, or being on screen, it depends on the project. One could be better than the other. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you're also an academic at the University of Melbourne too, aren't you?
Yes.
How do you fit all this in? How do you fit all this in?
Well, everyone has 24 hours in a day. How you partition it is quite interesting. Yeah. I think, like I said at the start, everything that I do, I feel like it's an extension. So it doesn't feel like I can get home, pack things up, and then start this whole new thing where I have to kind of, change my mind. While I'm at MEV, I talk about the things that I do at Melbourne Uni and, get those ideas, and people are like, oh, this is great, this and that. And then it kind of comes together, and then I come home and then we do a Yo City thing. And you might find that an artist that we've worked with at Yo City becomes relevant for a project that we're doing with the Melbourne Uni. So it's kind of like, it's a very good ecosystem. And that's how I do it. And at Melbourne Uni, we were approached last year, yeah. They wanted a course or like a subject where they can kind of basically teach students the diversity, like a meaningful diversity. And then I think they wanted people who are already in the industry doing the work, or at least in the real world, rather than somebody you've just been at uni, you've read books, whatever. So because of the work that we already do in the community through Your City, it made sense. So in the course that we teach, in the subject that we teach, it's film school, it's film students in their third year. And so we talk about what really diversity is. So, and the great thing is, because we're the industry people, like, we can be frank about things. We can be frank about the things that we see out here. If we talk about racism, we talk about it as it is. If we talk about diversity in terms of people living with disability, like being respectful in many different ways, we do that. However, for each week, we've invited other practitioners. So it goes beyond us, like people like Tiriki owners, Priya, Srinivasan, Letitia, like all these amazing industry people we've brought them in, asked them a couple of questions, and then we discuss it together, which makes it like a really well-rounded conversation with the students. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question, but I think it's pretty obvious. Do you think that we need more diversity in the arts?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I heard from one of the students, I think it was last week's class, you know, when you talk to young people, she's a white young woman, and it's like sometimes the things that, because, you know, we work in a space where diversity means a different thing and it's practiced and we do our best. But when you talk to somebody about what you might think it's a simple concept and you see the light bulb go, and then they go, oh, I get it. And, you know, I think she said something along the lines, you know, we hear the word diversity all the time, but it didn't really make sense to me. Like, I just thought, oh, if you have, you know, two girls with different hairs, that's diversity. That, because it's diverse, it's two different things. And so when you guys put it the way you put it and how we're having this conversation, it really makes sense that at the end of the day, what I might think is diverse might be different to somebody else. So I have to be ready to listen and to listen to their lived experience and what diversity means to them. And that's when we start to have a meaningful and a true meaning of the word diversity, I think, in my understanding. So yeah, so based on what we had taught in the class, when you hear a student come up with that kind of description, it's like, yeah, absolutely, we need it and we can't stop. And if young people start to see that, there's a good chance that things will be better in the future. So yeah.
What's the? Oh, sorry about that. Tell me, who's some of your role models?
My role models. I don't know. I don't think I've ever looked up, you know, say, oh, I'm modeling myself on this one particular person. And I'm also really bad with names. So I never name names. But I'd say, you know, sometimes, and this might seem cliched, but people who are closer to us, sometimes we overlook them and go far, and to go to the Oprah Winfrey's of this world and the whoever's, you know what I mean? Because they are relevant and they're there and all of that. But for me, I think it's people who are closer to me. It's people like my parents, you know, people like my mom, my dad, and even my aunties and all of that. Because as I'm sitting over here in far, far away lands, and I realized that for me to get to here, I looked upon, you know, I looked at my mom who went to high school when I was in primary school, like, you know, late in life, because, you know, she'd been working domestic works and all of that. But then once we moved, we had a house, my dad was working. She was like, I want to go to school. And then she went to a night school with other, you know, women from around. And it was the slowest thing. She was like, oh my God, this is like, you do one subject for like ever. She was like, you know what, actually, I'm just going to go and enroll in a high school. And I think, if my memory serves, she was in her 30s at the time. And you know what I mean? Like, I think for somebody to do that, it's quite, you know, you remember that. And at the time it was like, oh my God, my mom's going to school. Like, what the hell? And then later in life, it made sense that when you want something and you want it that bad, you go and you get it. And those are the kinds of things that I look at and I'm like, yeah, this woman is pretty amazing. So my mom. Yeah.
I'm getting teary now. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not? It's like, and I think that's it's and I think it's easy for people to remove something that's meaningful, to throw it to, I love this producer, I love this director, and it's great to do that, but it's also great to, they say charity begins at home. So yeah, that's that for me.
And talking about home, as well as everything that you're doing, you mentioned that you're a mum as well.
Oh, I am. I am. I think it's one of the, and I'm sure, you know, I don't want to be a mouthpiece for mothers, because I think it's a different experience for every single person. You know what I mean? Like, as a child, we experience our parents differently. But yeah, I think it's one of the toughest roles that any woman can play, or any mother can play. But at the end of the day, it's really also very fulfilling, because you go, I did that. I created that little human being, and to watch them thrive and do amazing things and kind of do your best to hopefully one day for them to come around and say my mom is my role model. It's not an easy thing, but it's a good challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Have they got any inklings of doing arts themselves? Have you noticed things in them?
My daughter definitely. She goes to Australian stage school. I don't know. Yeah, I think so. So she does triple threat. She does dancing, acting, and singing. And when they were little, they did modeling and everything. But my son, nah. We once asked him to come and work with us on set. He was like, I never want to do this. Is boring. Like, all of you just sit down. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But he's a 13-year-old boy, so I'm sure if I asked him to dig a hole there for 3 hours, he might have found that much more interesting. So I don't think he would get into the industry, but he has shown like interest in music. Like, he writes words and processes things through the word. So I don't know, and I don't think I want to force them into becoming what I know or joining me or whatever they do. I will embrace it, and I've told them that.
Cool. Now you've also got an interest in mental health as well.
Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. So, what would you like to see different in the mental health space?
I think more conversations, like more frank conversations, because I've spoken to a couple of different people, and most people who, like with indigenous background to whatever country, like, whether Africans or whatever other parts of the world, I know there's a big belief that, like, the idea of mental health and all of that stuff, there's all these terms which come from the Western world. So some of these words we don't know, like no idea what those words mean. But I feel like culturally, there are different words that we use for that, or different way of processing those kinds of things. So my wish is to kind of find a way to, because the thing is, mental health, good mental health and not so good mental health, it exists on anyone. It doesn't matter what's your background or what's your experience and everything. So my wish is to have conversations that make sense to people who are not necessarily of Western background, because some of the words, they are so foreign that you're like, I don't know what that word means. Like, I don't know what schizophrenia mean. I don't know. Maybe I've experienced it, but I don't know what it is. And so when you say it like that, it just sounds like there's something wrong with me, because like one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people, a lot of white people that I know, they know all these terms. I can't even say them myself, but it's like, it's a normal language, which is great, because it's like, I've got a headache, I'm going to go to see the doctor. I'm not feeling great. I think my mental health is doing A, B, C, D. There's a word for it. There's an understanding for it. I can speak to somebody about it. So I think in my endeavors in this mental health space, again, using what I do as an extension of everything that I do, I would like to talk to people on a level that, whether I use the creative space, whether I use my speaking abilities, whether it's through video, through talking to other people, that it becomes a regular part of our conversation, so that if somebody says, I have a therapist, it's a normal thing. It's like, I've got a GP, so that's my wish.
Is mental health in the African community talked about a lot, or it's kind of hidden, or?
I think it's starting to be a thing that people, I think a few people are working towards what I'm trying to say, because there's a feeling that it's needed, like those conversations are needed, because we can see each other suffering. We can see the generational trauma happening to a point where people don't know what's wrong with them. And when you think about it and you read books and you kind of analyze certain things, you're like, actually, there's this huge amount of trauma that can be dealt with, and you can work on things and you can be fine. But then I feel like we are making small steps. I know a few people, a few organizations that are doing that. But it's not necessarily talked about enough. And I think a lot of people, it's more like when you depending on what spaces you're in, if you just blurt something, you might find yourself going, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Like, you just make people feel uncomfortable. But that's not to say that when they leave with that, it means something to them. It's just that we don't really talk about these things. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong with me. I go to church, I go to this and I go to that. And that's okay. And I think to the greater part, and I speak for the African, like as an African person, there hasn't been, from my experience, there hasn't been a need to go to a therapist. However, there were always spaces and opportunities to talk to people, which is part of talk therapy. You know what I mean? Like, every once a month, women would meet just as women, talk about things. And while you might not think you're being therapized, you're sharing, this happened to me. And somebody might go, oh, I did this when that happened. Why don't you try that? And then when you go home, there's a bit of I've bred that, and so you've got aunties, the idea of it takes a village to bring up a child. You've got aunties, you've got grandmothers, you've got neighbors. If they see something's not going right, they'll come and they'll give you advice. And, so I think, and these are the conversations where you go, actually, you were having a therapy session right there. You know what I mean? But if you said to somebody, oh, hey, you need to go to a therapist, it's like, why would I do that? But if you go, oh, there's an auntie down the road, like she said, if you have any issues, come and talk to her. There, it's a therapy, it's a free therapy session, so it's happening in a different kind of setup and way. Yeah, but since we live in this world and there's more opportunity to kind of really zero in onto that and work on it in a holistic way. Yeah, that's where I'd like to see it go.
When you first got to Australia, I'm going to ask you a question. Were you in a bit of culture shock, or what were some of the things you noticed or went, whoa, this is very different to where I've come from?
I think it's different I grew up in Pretoria, right? And I went to live in Johannesburg when I was 16. So I think a city is a city. There are big buildings. I went to university, so I've always been, and I think South Africa is multicultural. Like, there's white people, there's people from this part of the world, and half the time we're all speaking in English. So in that sense, it was fine. It was normal. And because I was coming here through the arts world, most people, the circles that I was walking in is people who are well-traveled, people who are curious, genuinely. So that wasn't, it was just like, oh, it's a different city. It's great. It's nice. It's Melbourne. But one thing that I was like, oh, where are the Indigenous people? Like what the hell? I saw more Asian people in the city than Indigenous people. I was like, where am I? I thought I came to Melbourne. And the thing is, I didn't research a lot. You know how people read everything. I want to go here. I was just like, I'm going to go. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to just, be. But then that was one thing that I was like, this landscape does not look right. And then as I started to talk to people, I realized that, oh, if you want to see Indigenous people, you have to fly to a faraway part of this city, which is super expensive. You might just want to go to Fiji or something. And I was like, oh, why? And then that's when the little bit of interest started to kind of go, something's not balancing here. It's not computing. That was one thing that kind of shocked me and made me realize that Australia is not what it seems to be on, on the surface.
Yeah. Now, I know we don't have much more time left because I'd love to keep talking to you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I think where I am right now, I'm in a very interesting space where I am able to take stock and reflect on the things that I've done, how they've shaped me, and, obviously where I'd like to go. So I was saying to a friend the other day that when I first came here, I came to Australia for art, period. I was just like, I'm going back into the arts, because I love art as a medium, you know, that brings people together, that tells stories, whatever it may be. And then as soon as I started Oz African TV, because it was necessary, and I'm really happy and proud, and, you know, that I got to do that, I became closed into a box of, whether you want to call it an activist or, you know, speaking on behalf of African Australian people. And I felt for a long time I couldn't become all of me, because, you know, I wanted to write about anything. I couldn't, because I'm a woman, I'm a migrant, and most importantly, I'm an African Australian person who is fronting a certain platform. So that I felt stuck for a minute there. And then now I feel like, you know what? I've done that. I've paved the way for a couple of people. If anybody needs me, I'm here. I'm able to share knowledge, happily so. However, I feel like there's so much of myself that I have neglected or not given an opportunity to me to explore. Like, you know, I'm a dancer, I'm an art writer, I love going to galleries. I haven't been able to enjoy those things. So in the next 5 years, I think what I would love to see is not a different self, but a more fuller self, where I'm able to go into the African Australian community and do that work, but also be able to come home and say, I've gone to a gallery and I've written this piece about art that is art for the sake of art. It doesn't matter if it was produced by an African person, a white person, an Asian. It's art, it's beautiful, it's telling a story. And I should be okay to be able to do that. And, you know, I should be able to work with whoever I want. So that's where I feel like I'm going in the next 5 years. And I can show up for me first and foremost, the way I am, like as who I am.
Last question is one to think about for a second. What would you like our listeners to walk away with today?
Oh, a lot. I'm joking. No, I think, you know, opportunities to speak to anyone, especially where you get to speak about yourself. I think when people are listening to this particular episode, I think really, if you can take from, you know, I've done quite a lot of stuff. I think what I would like people to take away is to sit with themselves and take stock of who they are, what they've done, to appreciate themselves, to kind of go, I am enough as I am, and I can be many things to myself, so that you don't feel stuck in a corner that maybe you were put in by default or by circumstances, by struggles, by all of that sort of stuff. Realize that you can be all of yourself. You know, you can show up as all of you, no matter what that looks like.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful little ending. Look, I want to say thank you very much for hanging with me for the last 40 minutes. It's always a pleasure to hear you and see your beautiful smile.
Aww.
So guys, thanks to Dorcas for joining us, and I'll see you guys at the next podcast. See you guys.
Thanks for having me.